Hello, welcome to the season 2 of the Tokyo College discussion series, Taka and Takeo Explain the Japanese Economy. This is Takeo Hoshi, Professor of Economics at the University of Tokyo and the Tokyo College, with Professor Takatoshi Ito at School of International Relations and International and Public Affairs, SIPA, of Columbia University, and more importantly, my co-author of the Japanese Economy second edition from MIT Press. We thank the Tokyo College for sponsoring the series and the Center on Japanese Economy and Business at Columbia University for being an outreach partner.
Okay, so this is the final episode of the season 2, and we continue to have Professor Daiji Kawaguchi as a guest. And this episode, we discuss what has been happening in the Japanese labor market during and after the COVID-19 pandemic.
And this time, let me start. Before the pandemic, Japanese employment was rising. This was especially the case for women, and this was probably a result of womenomics policy under the Abe administration. And we discussed this in chapter 10 of our textbook. During the first 7 years of Abe administration, women's employment increased by 3 million. So this is a serious number. And the M curve, so this is a classical M curve. As women ages, they go out of the labor market and come back later again. And that was the characteristics of the female labor supply in Japan. That pretty much disappeared. The women started to continue to be in the labor market, even around the marriage and having the children. And we show these in figures in chapter 10. Taka, do you have a slide to share on this? So we show this figure again, the figure 10.14 and 10.15. Those are the figures that shows the change in or the impact of womenomics. So this is the figure 1014, right? The 10, not 10.4, 1014 from the textbook. And this is exactly the same as a textbook. And this shows the M curve. It's just as I explained, M curve for the female labor supply basically disappeared as you move from 1970s, 1980s to 2015, 2019. Okay, and let's move on to the next figure, the figure 10.15. This is slightly different from the textbook one because we updated by adding some recent numbers. So it's here we can see the both female labor supply and male or female employment, and male employment increased during the Abenomics period. But recently, after the COVID-19, there was a shock and both employment declined, probably female more than the male employment. So let me ask an important question. So the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the employment, especially that of women, declined. So an important question is, will the pandemic wipe out all the gains for women in the labor market under the Abenomics?
So here is a time series of the employment rate by sex and age group. And the red line is the change of the employment rate, which is number of employment divided by the population. And the red one is compared with January figure. And as you could see on the left-hand side panel, we plot the female figures. And as you can see, from February, March, the employment rate of female started to decline. And but that decline was stopped around May, and the decline was most severe among young female. But for other age group, the decline was rather limited by 2 percentage point, up to 2% point, and it has already recovered until October. So I'd say that the decline of the female employment rate is serious among younger age people whose age is between 15 and 24. But for other age group, I'd say that the negative impact was rather limited. And for male, again, we can see that the negative impact was concentrated among younger people whose age is between 15 years old and 24 years old. So to answer Takeo's question, I think the current COVID-19 crisis do not blow off the gains obtained during the Abenomics.
Still, there seems to be a cost for young women,
Sure.
and to some extent, young men too.
Right. So that's right. So those people who just enter the labor market seem to suffer from this downturn.
Okay.
All right. So let me change slightly the topic that following the COVID-19 shock, some sectors, some industries have been in serious trouble, but some other sectors seem to be booming because of the change of the demand, home office and so on. So when we look at the stock prices by industry, we find very divergent path of stock price movement. And the difference between the high performing sector and the low performing sector over the time has been increasing. And to show the point, let me share the screen again. This is 33 different industry groups in Tokyo Stock Exchange. And this is awfully difficult to show, see which industries with which line. But the point is that drop last March was very sharp, very sudden. But the recovery was also very quick. It was so very quick for some industries and very slow, still stagnant, some other sectors. So divergence is very large, dispersion is very large. And just to pick the sort of high performing and low performing sectors, this is the one I picked good performing sectors and not so good performing sectors intentionally. So the high performing is information and telecommunication, no surprise, precision tools and other manufacturing. And actually other manufacturing has some game maker there. So you could understand why it's doing so well. Not so doing well is air shipping and mining. And steel was also not so good sectors, but recently it is making a comeback. So the point is that, there are reasons why these high performing sectors are doing good because demand has shifted. Consumers' demand have shifted to the home office and entertainment at home. air shipping, of course, air traffic has been very slow due to the quarantine and so on. So this makes sense. Now, the question is that, is this tendency going to continue after vaccines become available and so on? Or is it temporary? Is it gonna go back to old normal? So new normal or old normal? If it is going to continue, we need to shift the resources, capital and labor, to the booming sectors, continue to boom sectors. And is Japanese employment system, can Japanese employment system accommodate this demand shift? So that's the question. What do you think, Daiji?
So to answer Taka's question, I'd like to share the slide based on the government cabinet office survey implemented December 2020. The a question included in the survey asked whether the respondent work from home or not. And this is the percentage of workers who work from home by industry. And as you can see, as of December 2020, the 65.6% of the workers work from home in the information and telecommunication industry. Whereas when it comes to transportation, the fraction of workers work from home was 9.4%. So the I think a part of the divergence of the recovery speed reflect the possibility to work from home. So when we look at the industry that belongs to the upper leg of the K shape, I noticed that the remote workability or the fraction of workers working from home is high. And on the other hand, the industry belonging to the lower part of the leg, K leg, seems to be the industry with lower fraction of workers working from home. So the partially the divergence is, I would say, depends on the how industry can accommodate the temporary shock. So I think that the divergence is partially due to the temporary shock. But at the same time, having heard that decrease of the stock price of the air transportation industry, or the transportation industry in general, or mining industry, it might reflect the permanent shift of the lower mobility of the people after the COVID-19 crisis. For example, like the business demand for business trip may have decreased, and that might be reflected in the lower price of those industry. So I think it's a really mixture of the temporary shock and permanent shock. But I'd like to bring up the issue that the remote, the possibility to work from home are really different depending on the industry.
Okay. That graph that you showed is very interesting. That shows the three timings, December of 2019, and what happened in May, and then I forgot which months, but late to 2020, right? And what this shows is remote work, the proportion of remote work increased during the May, and it came back, or it declined a little bit as the COVID-19 situation improved a little bit, or temporarily. but it didn't come back to the 2019 level. It stayed high in many of the industries, right? So that to me shows that this was at least partially a permanent shock. So assuming that if this is a permanent shock and we are looking at the divergence between industries, we would ideally want the resources, including the workers, to move from the declining sectors to expanding sectors. Okay, so that's what at least the economist would want. But the current policies of the Japanese government, it seems to me, rather try to resist such labor adjustment. The policy measures such as business continuation subsidies, they seem to just encourage the companies to maintain the current employment and discourages the restructuring of the movement of the laborers. So that leads me to question that is Japan in danger of protecting zombie companies, the declining companies that we shouldn't protect? And Japan has done this in the past, as I did some research on. So Japan is in danger of protecting zombie companies again. What can the government do to encourage rather than discourage necessary adjustment?
Thank you for, first of all, I think Takeo pointed out a very important point that the increase of the fraction workers work from home in last May didn't come back to the pre-COVID-19 level as of the December of last year. So the part of the penetration of the work from home practices seems to be persistent in many industries. So in that sense, the shock is a part of the shock is permanent, and it requires the change of the industrial structure to a certain degree. And I think government have to think how to move the worker across the industry smoothly. And one of the way to smooth out the workers' mobility across industry is so-called active labor market policy, including offering the opportunity of the public training. And one of the drawbacks of the current practice of Japanese government is that government do not assess the effectiveness of the policy in a rigorous way. And I think government have to really collect the data, how effective to demonstrate how effective is the policy, training policy on the labor market outcome. And I think with this caution, I think Japanese government have to think about expanding active labor market policy. And regarding this zombie farm, I do not have much to say to the person who invented the concept of the zombie farm in the world. So now everybody say about zombie farm, but Takeo apparently is certainly developed the concept, and I have a very high respect on that regard. But now I'm lucky to work with Takeo and Kenichi Ueda. Kenichi is a colleague of mine at the University of Tokyo. And we ran a survey with TSR. We mean that the Center of the research center called CLAPE that aims at evaluating government policy. Ran a survey with Tokyo Shoko Research Company, and we collected the respondents' response from around 5,000 company, and the survey asked whether the company took up the government business support program. And what we found so far is that the company or firms with lower credit score before the breakout of the current pandemic, are more likely to take up the business support program or concessional loan programs. So in the world of the program evaluation, the firms are negatively selected into the program treatment. So the firm with lower credit scores before the pandemic began more likely to take up those concessional loans and the business support program. So in that sense, government current policy is directed toward worse businesses. So we have to pay attention to this negative selection issue.
Okay, thank you, Daiji, for advertising our paper. I will work on that right after we finish recording this episode. And the CREEP stands for Center for Research and Education of Policy Evaluation, which is a center within the University of Tokyo. So I just wanted to put in that. Let me come back to the issue of the employment in Japan and or the labor market issues. By November, the pandemic situation evolves, and we seem to be getting out of the third wave of pandemic here in Japan. We don't know yet, but by November of 2020, so before this third wave started, the employment seems to have recovered to the pre-pandemic level, and I haven't followed what's been happening in the third wave, but employment situation in Japan compared with other countries seems to be mild. The shock hasn't been, the pandemic shock hasn't been that bad for employment in Japan, but we continue to hear the news and reports on very tough situations for a part of the labor force, especially the female part-time workers. Okay, and what trend do you see in Japan's employment situation now in general, and especially to those subgroup of the labor force which seems to be having a hardship?
Yes, so overall figure of the labor market situation, such as the unemployment rate, the negative shock seems to be quite limited. But there is a famous saying that 5% unemployment rate does not mean that 5% of the one person is unemployed. But for the 5% of the people in the labor force, they are fully unemployed. And I think even if the figure is small in the aggregate statistics, there are the people who fully suffer from the negative shock from the COVID-19. So we should never overlook those people. And at the same time, I would appreciate the journalist's effort to cover those stories. So having said that, when we look at the aggregate statistics, we do observe the heterogeneity of the negative shock. So the first group is younger women, as I said before. But at the same time, when we look at the family composition of the female workers, so I'm working with Shintaro Yamaguchi, who is a colleague of mine, and Taiyo Fukai, who is at the Cabinet Office, and Ikeda-san, who is a graduate student at the University of Tokyo. Four of us gathered together to examine the impact of the COVID-19 on the employment rate. And what we found so far is that the women with children whose children's age is the primary school age, we found a negative impact. So March, Japanese government abruptly closed school to as a public health measure. And because of that, mothers with primary school age children have to take care of the kids, and they needed to quit the job. And it became difficult to come back to the labor force even after the school reopened. So there were the group of people who severely suffer from the negative shock by COVID-19.
So the school closure was really costly for the parents or the mothers.
Yes.
Maybe not so much for students, but well, may have been costly for students as well. But so in a sense, that it was a good idea for Japan to lift those school closures earlier than many other countries. You think?
I think so.
Okay. Well, thank you, Daiji, for a very informative discussion. We will continue to watch how the Japanese labor market responds to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we will eventually update our textbook. And I'm sure we will be asking you more questions in the near future.
Thank you, Daiji. And this ends the season 2 for Taka and Takeo Explain the Japanese Economy. And we hope the viewers have enjoyed this series, and we may continue to a season 3 if we get a good reception of the season 2. So until then, thank you very much, and goodbye. Thank you, Daiji.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.